They didn't just steal Africa's land and wealth, they tried to erase its soul. Through flags, crosses, and guns, colonizers rewrote history, branding Africa as uncivilized, its cultures as primitive, and its people as broken. But Africa was never uncivilized, it was silenced. And the echoes of that erasure still shape how the world sees Africa today. This is the story of how cultural genocide was disguised as civilization and why the lie still matters. The myth of Western superiority. From the 18th century onwards, colonial powers framed their conquests as moral duty. They called it the white man's burden, claiming it was their responsibility to civilize backward people. But behind the humanitarian mask was a racist ideology. European languages were forced upon African children, while native languages were banned in schools. African religions were demonized, labeled as witchcraft, and violently suppressed. Western dress codes were mandated in schools and workplaces. Indigenous attire was ridiculed or outlawed. Traditional leaders were replaced by colonial administrators or puppet chiefs. And African knowledge systems, from medicine to governance, were dismissed as superstition. The underlying message was clear. To be African was to be inferior. To be European was to be modern. The erasure of African identity, colonial rule didn't just redraw borders, it fractured identities. In many schools, African children were beaten for speaking their mother tongue. Names were anglicized. A child named Kwame became George. Ngũgĩ became James. Indigenous customs, from storytelling to ceremonial rites, were replaced with Christian hymns and European textbooks. Museums in Europe still house the physical evidence of this erasure. Sacred masks from Benin, bronze plaques from Nigeria, royal regalia from Ghana and Congo. While Africans were told their heritage was primitive, the West displayed it behind glass, labeling it as art, refusing to return it. The schoolbooks of silence, colonial education was never about empowerment. It was designed to produce obedient subjects, not thinkers or leaders. History textbooks glorified colonial heroes and erased African contributions. Students were taught more about Queen Victoria than Shaka Zulu, more about Napoleon than Mansa Musa. Generations grew up knowing their colonizers' language, literature, and laws, but not their own ancestry. This intellectual colonization continues today. Many African countries still use Western curricula, still depend on former colonial languages for government and business, and still measure progress through a European lens. Religion as a tool of colonization. Christian missionaries often arrived before the colonizers. Their mission? Convert the heathens. But their impact went far beyond faith. Sacred African beliefs and ancestral practices were outlawed. Traditional healers were jailed, temples were destroyed, and religious festivals were banned. Indigenous gods were replaced by saints, shrines replaced with churches. In many cases, missionaries taught Africans that salvation came with obedience to colonial rule, turning religion into a weapon of compliance. Perhaps the most damaging legacy of colonization was psychological. Africans were taught to view themselves through the colonizers' eyes, as dirty, inferior, incapable. Skin whitening products, hair straightening tools, and European etiquette were pushed as the standard. Tribal affiliations were manipulated to incite ethnic divisions, laying the groundwork for future conflicts. This mental colonization still haunts African societies today. It affects how young Africans see themselves, their heritage, and their worth. Resistance through culture. But Africa did not go quietly. Across the continent, people fought back not just with weapons, but with culture. Ngũgĩ Thiong'o rejected writing in English and returned to his native Gikuyu language. Fela Kuti used Afrobeat to challenge colonial hangovers in Nigeria. In Senegal, Léopold Sédar Senghor led the Negritude movement, celebrating Black identity and culture. Across villages and cities, oral traditions, drumming, dance, and dress kept ancestral knowledge alive. Culture became the battlefield and the weapon of resistance. The fight to reclaim what was stolen today. African nations are demanding back what was stolen. The Benin bronzes, taken by the British in 1897, are being repatriated after decades of activism. The Kohinoor diamond, though from India, remains symbolic of how imperialism treated sacred treasures. Museums in Europe are facing growing pressure to return stolen artifacts. But it's not just about objects. It's about memory, identity, and justice. Cultural erasure didn't end with colonialism. It just changed form. Western media still frames Africa as a land of poverty, war, and need. Western aid is portrayed as generosity, while the centuries of theft are conveniently forgotten. Africans who seek reparations are told to move on, while their histories remain distorted. But history is not just about the past, it's about power, and reclaiming the truth is the first step toward healing what was broken. Africa was never a dark continent. It was made to look that way by those who stole its light. But now, the truth is rising. Voices once silenced are speaking louder than ever. Like, share, and comment to keep this truth alive. Subscribe for more videos that expose the lies and honor the strength of those who resisted. Next up, Part 6. How Africa Resisted, Forgotten Heroes and Uprisings They Never Taught Us. Stay with us. We're just getting started.